Welcome, Jet fans, to another episode of the Jets Life podcast. The season's finally over. We enter the long-awaited offseason after what's been a disappointment. We'll recap the season a little bit here, talk a little bit about the results of the Miami Dolphins game, Jets getting that victory. So another victory Monday for the Jets. We tend to have a little bit of luck when we play the Florida teams. At least this season. But yeah, I think we all kind of just couldn't wait for this point of the season. A lot of promise coming into the season, a lot of hype, obviously, and all that hype, all that promise kind of went down the drain as quickly as the season ended. But yeah, so we reached this point here, and the Jets kind of hit the ground running here from a interview standpoint. We'll touch on some of those interviews, but before we get there, we'll talk about the game a little bit here. Obviously, a game where whether your team tank, whether your team win for the game, it ended up working out for the Jets. They ended up getting the victory 32 to 20 against the Dolphins. Aaron Rodgers throwing his 500th touchdown, and then 3 more to boot on top of that. And the Jets fall from the 6th pick to the 7th pick. So the result of a victory is dropping 1 slot in the draft. I think you look at the season, maybe if your team tank and you're saying what the hell they do in winning games, I think the bigger issue is that Jaguars game, winning that game, obviously going into this final week of the season, we would have been sitting right around I believe the 2nd overall pick, or maybe the 3rd. I forget exactly how we would have slotted right there. But obviously going into the final week of the season, 2nd or 3rd overall pick, it would have been pretty enticing. Who knows what obviously players and coaches don't tank. Rodgers' final game, potentially a lot of stuff on the line there, potentially for this team. So I end up probably saying we'll fall in the same spot no matter what. Still probably would have beaten Dolphins. Dolphins just with Hundley just didn't look right. 4 turnovers in this game. Defense played relatively well. I understand Hundley is, a 3rd string quarterback in most teams, but I mean, he played pretty well a few weeks ago to get a victory. So I think that with the way this defense is playing, we're not really giving out moral victories. It's like a win for the team, win for this franchise team that desperately really needs some sort of positivity because all the negativity surrounding this team right now, it just things have to change. And what a way to get this whole offseason started, get a win. Listen, if that 6th dropping from 6 to 7 cost us a guy like Abdul Carter. I mean, unfortunately, yeah, it sucks. But at the end of the day, they're picking 7th in this draft, and I posted a list of players that will be available, or should be. One of the players should be available with the 7th pick. You're going to get one of these players, whether it's Ted McMillan, Abdul Carter, Mason Graham. Um, Obviously, the 2 quarterbacks are probably going to be gone: Cam Moore and Jadar Sanders. There's a handful of players that'll be there. Will Campbell. There's going to be players there, and I think to sit on this season and say, oh crap, we dropped the 7th pick. We weren't really going to find ourselves in a situation where we're picking the top 2, and weren't going to get a quarterback, unfortunately, unless you're picking in top 2. Do you reach for a guy like Jalen Milroe? I'm personally am not on the bandwagon of doing that so early in the draft. If he continues to slip in the draft and maybe finds his way into the mid-20s, could you potentially perform a trade-up scenario there? Yeah, sure. But as far as the quarterback situation, it just wasn't going to happen. When you're really tanking, really you should only be tanking for a quarterback. Again, I understand the players and coaches don't tank. They're fighting for their lives. They're putting good film on tape, so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, I mean, Jets get a win. Rodgers' potential final game of the season, final game of his career, potentially final game as a Jet as well. Obviously, I just don't see a situation where the Jets bring him back unless the new coaching staff, new general manager are adamant that he is that guy that gives them the best chance to win. And, with the group of options that are out there, it does kind of at least kind of poke in your head is what's outside better than what's already inside the building. Obviously, guys like Justin Fields are likely going to be available. unless the Steelers keep him around and let Russell Wilson go. That leads you to Russell Wilson. Obviously, we understand his potential decline over the last couple of seasons. Played a little bit better in the middle of the season this year when he came in and destroyed us, and obviously has the Steelers in position for the playoffs here, or in week one of the playoffs. So there are going to be options. Jameis Winston will be out there, um, but I just think the writing is on the wall here. Whether or not you can improve internal, external, it just seems like when you just the vibe overall, press conferences, conversations, it doesn't seem like Aaron Rodgers is speaking as a guy who believes he has a chance to be here next year. Um, so whether or not your team run it back or team get rid of him, I think the latter is probably more likely. But again, I think hopefully the decision comes down to who the new head coach and GM is. That'd be a bad way to start a relationship with your owner and all that stuff if your owner basically says he's out and that's the end of the story. Would like to would like it if the GM and head coach had that final say. Um, really, I mean, again, going into this game, not much really to discuss. I mean, Aaron Rodgers looked, you know, like his old self a little bit in this game. Was able to get around the pocket, make solid throws. Garrett Wilson a little quiet in this game overall. I mean, it's just kind of been the nature of what has been the last few weeks with Aaron Rodgers throwing the ball in the direction of Garrett Wilson. I just don't know. Maybe that has a play on this whole thing too, is the relationship between Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson. The last few games of the season, I just don't believe the targeting to Garrett Wilson was just nearly enough for what I believe Garrett Wilson has been and should be at this point of his career. So maybe a new quarterback comes in, realizes the toy he has out there, and uses them a little bit more frequently than what Rodgers was willing to do, at least late in the season. I understand early in the season the targets were high up there, and then after Devontae Adams came in, those targets tend to drop down a little bit. Um, so definitely cause for concern there, but again, that's someone else's discussion for a different day. But the Jets get the win, 32-20, like I said earlier, and they dropped one spot in the draft. I'm not, ripping my head off, screaming at the TV, screaming at the team, screaming at the players because they won a game that dropped them one spot in the draft order. These players are out there that they're fighting their asses off, whether or not you like the product on the field or not. They're still fighting for the name on the jersey, and that's the front of the jersey. And they're all playing their asses off. And you know what? In a season where the owner quit on the team early on in the year with the firing of Robert Saleh, who I was on board with at the time, obviously looking at where this has led us to this point, it's kind of a you know would have liked to see Saleh get the opportunity with this with a updated offense a little bit here after transitioning over to Hackett. Just never got the opportunity. But let's go into some of this head coaching news and updates and whatever have you. Um, so up until this point, I'm just going to go through the listing here. We've got Vrabel and Rivera both interviewed for the position already. Vrabel with his interview, I believe, was on Thursday or Friday, whatever day it was towards the end of the week. Basically, the first day he was eligible after the new year, after his contract expired with the Browns as a consultant. He put the Jets on there as his first landing spot as an interview. So that was promising. Ron Rivera, the Jets kind of getting their wheels in motion on the head coaching search with coaches that are not currently employed with other teams, and got the two interviews in place. There are more interviews to come. Obviously, Rex Ryan is scheduled to interview. My understanding is that interview will take place tomorrow. And then Ulbrich, there was a report last week that he would get an interview to become the permanent head coach. I don't know what that interview even means because, I mean, with the list of candidates that are out there, I think that's pretty well understood. Ulbrich will not be getting the job, but who knows? I think that would be obviously kind of foolish. I think the interview process as a whole, interviewing a guy that you know is not going to get the job, Seems a little foolish overall. But anyway, Ulbrich at some point will get an interview. An unrealistic interview is kind of sad there. And then you kind of work your way through some of these reports that are kind of slipping out. I tried to organize as much as possible, but the hot name that everyone's kind of talking about, Ben Johnson. There's been multiple reports that the Jets have not extended a request for an interview, and there's also been reports on the other side that Ben Johnson doesn't really seem to have interest in the Jets job. So um, I don't think the Jets are just not interested in interviewing him. I think the reasoning for not extending an interview request is obviously has something to do with the fact that he has no interest. So I don't know how to take this exactly. I mean, obviously, you look at it from afar and you're like, okay, this guy just doesn't want to interview with the Jets. Does it have something to do with the guy on the other side of the ball, um, Aaron Glenn potentially being out there as a potential front line for the Jets head coaching spot? Maybe he just doesn't want to interfere with a colleague of his and interfere in his potential to get the job. I don't think that's the case. I think it says more to do with where the Jets are at. I think going into the offseason and going into the season the whole time, if you were someone who believed that Ben Johnson would realistically have any interest in this team, it probably wasn't, going to happen at all. And with the reports that are coming out as of today, it just seems more and more likely that, it just doesn't seem like that was ever going to really be an option. Just looking over some reports coming out here, just seeing if anything else kind of finds its way. Um, so yeah, Ben Johnson, unfortunately, as much as we all would have loved to have some life put into this offense, um, won't be the guy coaching the team next year. And realistically, I think we all kind of see where this is going already. Um, it doesn't seem like the Jets will be in position to land a former head coach as their current head coach. I mean, there are guys like Flores still out there that the Jets can interview. Um, but I think outside of Flores, with the Vrabel news that he's likely leaning towards the Patriots if that position opens, which it had as of yesterday with the firing of Gerard Mayo, that just kind of if you're a Jet fan, that was probably the top name on your list, on your wish list, was a guy with experience, a guy with successful experience. Um, and unfortunately, Vrabel seems to be leaning towards that direction. We'll see. I mean, obviously, there's still a lot of time. He's familiar with Kraft, he's familiar with there, so you would think that there'd be some, leaning there. Former player, obviously, but yeah, kind of a shot in the foot there. I think when you got the news that the Jets were his first interview, kind of felt a little positive. Heard that the Bears and Saints were going to be in the running too. I kind of lean towards the Jets being a little more favorable of a destination for him over the Bears and Saints. The Bears have a quarterback, sure, but outside of that, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Plus, he's kind of working his way into a situation where the GM is picked for him. Ryan Poles is already there, so the Bears don't really show any interest in letting him go, at least after the season. They're looking to stick around with him for at least another year. But yeah, it's unfortunate, but there's going to be a lot of names to be had. Rex Ryan, obviously, getting the interview, has some experience as well, albeit experience from a long time ago. That's my biggest concern there with him is hasn't been a coach for a long time. He still has that same, motivational tactics. He still has those, he's still Rex, and that was a big thing for us in those couple years. Rex and his personality and his bravado got the team full of confidence enough to make a run with a handicap at quarterback, something that Robert Saleh was not able to do with Zach Wilson. Rex Ryan was able to get the best out of his defense and push them far enough to where they were able to basically string us along into potential AFC Championship games. And unfortunately, in those games, just not playing full game was an issue. Um, Missing it in the first half in the Steelers game, missing it in the second half in the Colts game, obviously resulted in losses in both those years, and haven't seen the playoffs, haven't seen success really since Rex Ryan was here. We had the one season with Fitzpatrick, and Marshall and Decker and all that fun stuff, but outside of just not enough success. Going back to the old would be fun, but I don't know. It just I have concerns over getting a guy that's been out of the job for quite some time. Now, if Rex has any interest in coming in with a you know hotshot offense coordinator, whether it be like a guy like Cohen from for the Buccaneers as a defensive coordinator type of situation, that would be very appealing. I would be all for a situation like that. I just think that Rex Ryan's ego might have him set to be more of wanting to be the alpha in the room, being the leader of the room, which is what you would want out of Rex Ryan anyway. But being a defense coordinator coming in with a guy that like Cohen, who's shown if you look at that Tampa Bay offense, it's outstanding with the amount of injuries they had this season. Um, Getting the best out of Baker Mayfield, a guy who's basically kind of run out of town in Cleveland, run out of town in Carolina, sent to the Rams. Um, second year there with a second offensive coordinator, and nothing. There was no drop off there. That's always the concern when you kind of find a team that's got a new offensive coordinator. Sometimes I take that acclimation period, and there really wasn't that. Baker Mayfield had one of his better seasons of his career under Cohen, so that would be a situation that if you're the Jets and you could work something out. There was a report, and we'll get into GM candidacy as well, but there was a recent report that the Jets have requested an interview with Mike Greenberg of the Buccaneers for the GM spot. So maybe it's a situation where you can bring in a pairing of Greenberg and Liam Cohen as a kind of a pair from Buccaneers. Some familiarity because I think that's when you look at it, the Jets are in a weird situation now where they're hiring both a a head coach and a GM. You'd like for there to be some sort of continuity. I think there was major debates a few years ago with how the Jets structured their organization, where they had the GM and head coach being equivalents, both reporting up to the owner, and then they changed that structure in this last cycle where when they hired Salah, it was a big talking point that they had to have that linear structure from head coach to GM to owner. I really don't think that really matters. I think when a successful organization, whatever you do in life, the best organizations are run when everybody has the ability to have those like open conversations, open dialogue amongst each other. And I think that does happen. But to get a situation where you have some collaboration with a coach and a GM that come in kind of hand in hand. I mean, you look at what the Giants have with Brian Dable and Joe Shane, and obviously that situation has kind of faltered. But those two do see eye to eye in their decision making. I mean, both had aspirations of wanting to trade up in the draft last year. You saw it in the documentary for HBO Hard Knocks. But they are hand in hand, kind of seeing the same vision, trying to get the same to the same goal. And I think a situation like that where you can kind of pair whoever you're bringing in, and you get that same kind of gist a little bit with potentially if the Jets go into a situation with Aaron Glenn. My issue with Aaron Glenn, I mean, I loved him as a player. Um, awesome for us in the late '90s while he was here. This franchise is just runs coaches out of town every 2 or 3 years, and I would hate for the good memories of Aaron Glenn to be kind of soured with potentially a poor run as a head coach. Now, it would be an awesome story. Obviously, it would be amazing if Aaron Glenn came in here and um, was that coach that turned this whole damn thing around. Former player coming back, showing that kind of where the Jets kind of mentality that Rex Ryan coached when he was here as a head coach. It'd be awesome if the Jets were able to kind of do that. I just don't have the most of faith that the Jets can really do this with a first time head coach promoted from a coordinator spot. That's why going into the season, I was all for the Jets just doing whatever possible to interview as many people as possible after the Salah firing, They kind of got off to it pretty late. Did get a few names in the hat, but just not doesn't seem like they did nearly enough on that front to try and escalate these things. And obviously, I understand guys are being guys are employed. Obviously, you can't do anything there. But they could have probably went the college route, whatever the case may be, just didn't get there. Um, but Aaron Glenn, obviously, the big name that you talk about right now, especially after last night's win and then clinching the NFC North, clinching the first round bye, clinching the number one seed. His performance yesterday against a high powered Minnesota Vikings offense, holding them to 9 points, keeping them out of the end zone. That in the red zone within the 5 yard line. I mean, the Vikings got down there. It it seemed like the entire first half they were hanging out inside the 20 yard line, and his defense with all the injuries to all the different levels of the defense, losing a potential defensive player of the year candidate in Aiden Hutchinson early in the season. The defense took its lumps and bruises. It's definitely not been perfect. They've given up a lot of points in games. But in a game where they needed it, he came in with a solid game plan and worked to the players that were on the field, worked to their strengths. And that's definitely what you want out of a head coach, out of a coordinator. Out of a head coach, you want a leader of men. You want someone that's going to do that same thing, but from afar. Um, I think any candidate who comes in here, the biggest conversation point needs to really be, what their role is going to be with the team. Are you a former defense coordinator that's going to be calling the defensive plays? Are you a former defense coordinator that's going to be hands-on, hovering over what the defense is doing because that's the side that you're familiar with? Um, that's what the Jets have done coaching cycle after coaching cycle after coaching cycle, hiring these defensive-minded guys that just don't put their hands enough in the offensive's cookie jar, to say. The Jets really just need somebody who's going to be more involved with what's going on the offense side of the ball and also what's going on the defense side of the ball. You look at a coach like Dan Campbell. I know Lions are the topic of conversation here because we're talking about Aaron Glenn. When you look at a guy like Dan Campbell, you know, he doesn't. The first off, the team runs based off his identity. You can see Dan Campbell in the way that the team plays. That's obvious to the point. But what he's done with the Lions is not only turn them into the top team in the NFC, obviously, but their record says it. But he has also developed coaches below him. Something that we have not seen as Jet fans for a really long time. The last coach to leave here and get a head coaching job somewhere was Mike Pettin. Believe got a head coaching job with the Browns. The Jets do not develop coaches, and I think that just goes to show like where I think the biggest problem of the whole thing is. The infrastructure within the building is not conducive of betterment of everybody within the building. Coaches don't go there and get better. Players don't go there and get better. You look at guys like Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner. Both are outstanding players, but do you really see them getting better to the extent that we would have envisioned when they were drafted? I mean, Garrett Wilson is an awesome player. I think he has all the talent in the world, but the coaching staff and the facility and the building do not make him better. I think he's a situation of just almost like a self-made player, just does everything right because that's what his skill set is. That's his talent. That's his abilities. That's everything he is. Same with Sauce Gardner. He came into the league as an all-pro player, and in year three has a down year. Now, is that his fault? Is that coaching fault? Who knows? But even in a down year, he's still an outstanding top 10 corner. I'm not debating that. I think he gets a lot more. I think he gets a lot more flack for his abilities because of his name, as opposed to if you were to close your eyes for a minute and spit out the stats of any cornerback in the NFL and tell us his stats, you would say, "Oh, that's a damn good player." But because Sauce Gardner, I think he gets a little bit more grief on that, just because of his name. But Aaron Glenn, again, the story would be awesome. I just being a Jet fan, we have seen this story a million times, just not in this exact light with a former player coming back to be a coach for the team. I just don't see a situation where it can potentially end well, and that's probably just a pessimist in me, just because of all the previous years of having confidence and having faith that they would eventually get it right. And here we are in a season where a lot of us believe there were Super Bowl aspirations, and we're talking about who we're going to pick seventh in the NFL draft. A year after picking 10th in the NFL draft with garbage at quarterback. It's such an unfortunate, such a sad situation, but nonetheless, the situation we're in. So would I be for Aaron Glenn? I would. I just would kind of lean on the side of getting somebody who has a little bit of experience, and if not someone experience, someone offensive minded that can at least put some life into this team. I mean, there's just not enough on the offense to where you feel like things are moving in the right direction. Another candidate that has been requested for an interview, per Diana Rossini, the Jets have requested an interview with Bobby Slowick. If you don't know who that is, offensive coordinator for the Houston Texans. Hot name last year. Did get a couple of interviews, I believe, last season as well after the amazing rookie season of CJ Stroud. This is a weird situation of buying low. Um, After a strong season in his first year, this season was not the greatest season for the Texans offense. I understand there were some injuries there. I understand all the different factors there. I personally see this as a situation that could falter against the Jets mightily. I can't see this being the hire unless he absolutely blows his team away in his press conference. I do like the idea of getting somebody from the Shanahan tree. I do like what that offense is. It's basically run its way around every corner of the NFL. Every team is getting a little piece of it to some extent. I do like that part of it, but does that make him a good head coach? I just don't. I don't see it here. Um, Second year offensive coordinator, I think probably still needs a little more time. It's not a situation like Ben Johnson, who just seems like he's firing on all cylinders with his play calling, with his development of his entire offensive roster. It just doesn't seem like that's the same route with Bobby Slowick. Obviously, huge, got to get a pat on the back for what he did in his first year with a rookie quarterback. That's all awesome, but I don't know that that makes you a candidate to be a leader of an NFL team, and especially this job. This job is not one for anybody. This job is not one that's gonna give you a lot of time. The owner might give you time, but I don't necessarily believe that this fan base has the patience anymore. I think this fan base just really really wants this garbage to end. We just want this playoff drought to be over. We just want to move on and play some winning football. Even if at this point, if it's squeezing into the playoffs as a 6 or 7 seed, you got to start somewhere. And this team just does. I mean, we're just not there. We're just not moving enough in that direction. Even this season could have been a year where if Rodgers didn't sneak us into the playoffs, then at least he pushed us in that right direction. Now, I would not have been for an 8 or 9 win season with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. Obviously, going into the year, our goals and aspirations were a lot higher, but things should have just been better, and it's not. And I don't put all the faith in a first time coordinator, um, but it's just leaning that way, man. It's just leaning in that direction that the Jets are going to find themselves in the same exact situation that they always seem to find themselves in, where they're going to be picking from a list of coordinators to get their first time gig, learning on the job, and I just don't know that that's the direction that they should really be going in. You know, the other side of it, the other side of the coin says you gotta keep throwing darts until you hit the right spot. And at some point it'll happen. I get it. I trust me, I do. But being a Jet fan for all this time and missing the playoffs 14 years, and for the much older Jet fans out there that have gone through the same cycle for the past 50 plus years, um, I just don't see how a guy getting his first shot after 2 years as a coordinator. Um, Now, if he gets hired, if he gets a job, trust me, I will look for every possible twist that I can put on this to make it seem like there's a possibility. I just got to tell you right now, I just don't know that this is the right job for a guy like Bobby Slowick to get his first opportunity. Situation like last year, if you got the job in Carolina, I think that gives you a little bit more grace. But that New York media is going to just hammer a guy like this, and that's not saying that Houston isn't, you know, its own level of media and has its own kind of covering there, but this is a fan base. This is you know a city that's just ready to try and win some football games after being sold that this was going to be the year. This was going to be the year that we finally made the playoffs. It just again, just upsetting that that's where we're at, and it makes this job so much more unappealing to some extent because I mean, I'm not saying anything that these guys don't know. These guys are going to be coming in here and they're going to understand like the amount of pressure that's going to be on them even in year one, especially with the roster still being as talented as it is. This isn't going to be a situation where someone's going to come in and be kind of given the keys to rebuild the whole thing from scratch, like Joe Douglas had it. There's some talented players on this team. Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, the entire offensive line is going to be intact next year, with the exception of the right tackle. They'll have to find someone there. Brees Hall is still here. Obviously, the quarterback is a major, major question mark, whether or not it's Aaron Rodgers or someone else. There is talent here. Devontae Adams, I mean, depending on what they do there, I think that most likely if Rodgers goes, Devontae's gone as well. But um, yeah, just a lot of stuff there for sure. Another interview request that was made out for the Jets was for Arthur Smith, Steelers offensive coordinator. I feel like I'm just going down like a just going down a rabbit hole here. Arthur Smith had plenty of time with the Falcons, just never really proved enough. He proved to be decent at running the football, um, but high draft picks on the offense side of the ball with Bijan Robinson, um, Kyle Pitts, Drake London, numerous players at skill positions that were brought in while he was there and not utilizing these players to the best of their ability. You see what's going on with Steelers right now. That offense is struggling. Just a weird situation to interview. I understand interview as many people as possible, especially guys with some experience, but I don't see Arthur Smith being a realistic option for the Jets. Um, I feel like he's one of those situations where maybe needs a little more time to kind of experience the coordinator role again and get back comfortable with it before getting another job as a head coach. This kind of move, I feel like, has Adam Gase written all over it. I mean, not to that extent, obviously, but it just doesn't seem like the right move for the Jets to go after a guy that's recently fired. Was he fired last year? Yeah, last year was so 1 year as a coordinator. I think is just not enough time um, for people to forget kind of what happened in Atlanta. So all these different coordinator interviews and head coaching interviews, and I haven't seen anything posted yet. But depending on how the Raiders situation goes, um, it sounds like the Jets will have the only open GM position. and I believe the Raiders probably stick with Telesco after he's only been there for 1 year. Um, anyway, without the Raiders are going to be anything significant. I mean, I think that kind of they brought in Telesco after a year, the year after he was fired from San Diego. So I guess there's still that possibility, but from everything I'm seeing so far, it sounds like they're leaning towards keeping him. So the Jets would have the only opening um, for a GM candidate. So the beauty of this is that it kind of puts you in a situation where you can kind of take your time a little bit, go through this interview process with as many names as you possibly can. Already, GM positions only 32 in the league, and to get the opportunity to interview everybody, go at your own pace. Um, you're the Jets are basically like, I'm not gonna say that they're the prom queen, but they're the only date that you could take to the prom, and there's gonna be a bunch of options out there that are vying for that one job. So if anything, the Jets kind of find themselves in a situation where they really can potentially get the best guy available, and if they play it smart, you know, you can get a guy like Agnew from the Lions. Hot name coming into the offseason. Again, you look at potentially pairing him with somebody he might know. Aaron Glenn obviously was a name that we were talking about earlier today. Um, and obviously, I gave my piece with that. I would like him as a head coach, but I just fear the potential backlash if things don't go well for a guy that I used to like as a player. But you can go through a guy like Agnew. You can interview a guy like Borgonzi and maybe pair him with somebody he's familiar with. You look at the Chiefs coaching staff, and uh, Nagy's an option, someone with former experience as a head coach. Personally, not a favorite of mine. But even Steve Spagnuolo, a guy who's been a solid defense coordinator for years and years and years. Maybe there's a situation where you bring him in as a potential head coach candidate that maybe not a lot of us are thinking about, but I think he's earned his stripes a little bit here over the last few years with what he's done with Kansas City to maybe get another swing at being a head coach. Not obviously the top name on the list, but somebody to definitely consider. And then just gonna go down the list of interviews that the Jets have done to this point. Louis Riddick was interviewed the day after or the day of Mike Vrabel, which I thought was a little strange. Um, same day, I believe it was like the afternoon. The interview was done with Louis Riddick. Thomas Dimitroff was, I believe, the first name they interviewed, or maybe actually was the second. I think John Robinson was the first. So a few names. John Robinson, obviously, previously from the Tennessee Titans. That was a situation that kind of popped up, and I wondered if that had anything to do positive or negative for Vrabel, maybe to get some kind of familiarity with what went wrong from his perspective, while also kind of seeing if that situation could be repaired. Obviously, we all understand the situation with Robinson and Vrabel did not end well, but good to see that a name kind of linked in some capacity to Vrabel um, kind of popped up, but obviously we'll understand where that's going now. But that's the names we interviewed so far. Dimitrov comes off as a pretty interesting candidate overall. Someone with a wealth of experience as a general manager and a wealth of experience where he had a franchise quarterback drafted by him in 2008 in Matt Ryan. Didn't end well, obviously. They didn't end up getting what obviously every team's goal should be, to win a Super Bowl, but had that team in contention most of the seasons he was there. I believe in his 12 seasons, they made the playoffs 6 or 7 times while looking at him. It's an interesting candidate, someone who's done the job, someone who's done it well to some extent. I thought that was a very interesting option to see that the Jets interviewing and just a name outside the box that nobody really would think of, and it just shows you that the Jets are really leaving no stone unturned. Um, Interviewing a guy that was, you know, basically out of a job for a couple of years. I think he's been the last couple of years in. football analytics, trying to work on that aspect of it. So he's a guy who's trying to improve himself as well. So interesting to see there, but um, a situation that I just don't know necessarily kind of works out. I think the Jets are just trying to again open up every single door and see where it takes them. Because at the end of the day, they have got to get this job right. Um, they've got to get the both the GM and the head coach right, and especially with the GM position, you're the only opening out there. Might as well interview as many names as possible. Obviously, time is of the essence because as names start to fall off the board on the coaching side, you'll want to have obviously figured out what you want to do on the GM side as well. Is try and get the coach. But yeah, interesting group of names for the Jets to have interviewed before this whole hiring cycle got kicked off. And then over the last couple of hours, a few names have dropped off here of interview requests that the Jets have made. One of the interview requests the Jets made was for Alec Calabi, assistant GM for the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, you look at the Eagles, you look at the success they've had over the last few years, even before that. Obviously, winning a Super Bowl a few years back. Um, it'd be nice to pluck somebody off the tree for um, from Howie Roseman. The issue here, personally, that I believe might stand out is the Jets recently hired a general manager off of Howie Roseman's tree. How familiar is Alec with Joe Douglas? What input does Joe Douglas have with a guy like this to maybe kind of lure him away? I'm not overly familiar with Alec Halaby, but again, he comes from a strong general manager. So to have somebody that's seen experience and seen what good experience looks like isn't always the worst thing in the world. I already brought Mike Borgonzi, that the Jets have requested an interview with him as well. Again, you look at when you go through these cycles, you look at the top 5 teams and you could basically cherry pick, um, open up their kind of team sites of who their top executives are. People are going to get interviewed. Borgonzi's a big name. He's been there for quite some time. Worked under Brett Veach for number of years. So, and the way that the Chiefs run that system, run the draft, is really second to none. I mean, they've drafted better than really anybody else in the league from an overall talent standpoint. I mean, that defense, middle round picks that turn into just outstanding players. You're looking at a guy like Trent McDuffie, picked in the late 20s, turned into arguably one of the best nickels in the league, if not the best. Um, and just one name after another. A lot of that has something to do with Steve Spagnuolo being the defense coordinator there. Knows what he needs to get out of his players. Um, Multiple Super Bowl winner as a defensive coordinator. Um, so a guy like Borgonzi going in there and just being able to draft players that fit the mold, fit what the defense coordinator needs, and defense coordinator to just kind of grow those players in his scheme to be what they are today. It's an interesting candidate. I wonder if this is a situation where a guy like Borgonzi kind of waits out other spots to open up in the future. We saw it for years and years and years with Eric DeCosta from the Ravens. For years, his name was popped up in interview cycles. I believe the Jets had requested interviews for him in like 2 different GM cycles, and he denied it both times. So could happen here as well. I'm not sure what's going to happen here with Borgonzi, but um, yeah, I mean, I'm all for going after the strong teams and trying to pluck someone out there who knows what a winning organization needs to look like. Um, but at the end of the day, you do need somebody in here that's going to be able to kind of withstand and kind of maintain control, because at some point things don't work out. What's happened to previous GMs, basically most cycles, is when things aren't going well, Woody tends to put his nose into things, and can any of these GM candidates, not just kind of singling out a guy like Borgonzi, I'm just saying, can any of these candidates be that guy that kind of sustains things? And let's be real. I mean, being a Knicks fan as well, for years and years and years, we talked about how Dolan was a terrible owner. Dolan was just awful. Dolan makes the wrong hires. Everything Dolan touched was awful. And finally, he gets the right guys involved, right guys making the decisions in within the Knicks front office, and nobody's talking about Dolan anymore. Nobody cares what Dolan has done because the Knicks are winning games now. They're a successful team. When a GM and head coach find success, you don't really talk about the owner much. When the Jets were successful in the early 2000s and mid 2000s, um, and obviously even going into Rex Ryan's years, making to back-to-back AFC Championship games, when all that stuff was happening, nobody really cared about the owner. I think where it got concerning was after the 2011 season, I believe it was, when Sanchez had a down year, and the Jets had interest in um, making a move for Peyton Manning. I know that was a sequence where I feel like Woody did get his nose involved, ended up pushing for the trade for Tim Tebow. But you know what? Like, stupid move, yeah. But what he did this year, I mean, you can't really fault the guy for wanting to try and do whatever possible, trading for Devontae Adams, trading, uh, sorry, finishing up the contract with Hassan Reddick. Um, and obviously that rubbed Joe Douglas the wrong way, hence why shortly after he gets fired, um, the Athletic gets another hit piece on the New York Jets. So at the end of the day, whoever this GM is going to be is going to have to understand that you got to have some control over the room as a whole, or else the owner will get involved at some point. Another name that's popped up here, Ray Farmer, a senior personnel executive for the Rams. Ray Farmer was a former executive for the Browns as well, so has some experience there as an executive for football operations. So at the end of the day, the Jets just need somebody with some level of experience. I just don't know if a guy like Ray Farmer, again, not being too familiar with the name itself, they're doing their due diligence. They're interviewing as many people as possible, trying to get as many names into the hat as possible. Nothing wrong there. I mean, if you can, the thing with a GM is, when you go to those interviews and you're trying to figure out who's the right guy, who's going to be the right guy, and stuff like that. The biggest thing is about selling. I mean, that's what GMs do on a daily basis. They have to sell to agents that this is the right place for their player. They have to sell to draft picks. They have to sell to you know other teams making trades. It's all about being a salesman at the end of it, but it's also about building the right culture, the right team underneath. And I don't know. Um, he did spend years as a scout. I think he started off as a scout with the Falcons, if I remember right, when I was looking him up, and then has been in many different pro development departments, Cleveland, the Browns, and then obviously a couple years here with the Rams to wrap things up here. So Jets again doing their due diligence, going through as many names as possible. When you look at what they're doing right now, they're basically interviewing everybody and anybody, and that's really what they should be doing here, is interview as many names as possible. I know that they did it with the Robert Saleh hire. I think they had, like, 8 or 9 interviews, for head coaches, and after those 8 or 9 interviews, they eventually kinda limited it down to, what, two people, I believe it was Robert Saleh, and I forget who was the other one that got the other interview. I do recall that 2 candidates got a second interview, in that cycle. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's all about just kinda going the right route here, and again, getting in a room with these people and seeing what their perception is of the New York Jets, seeing how they envision turning this thing around, for something that's not as bad off as maybe the national media might make it seem. The Jets are not a terrible situation right now. They have a lot of talented players. They have a top 7 pick in the draft. They have 30 million in cap space that can become a lot more if handled correctly. Um, they're not. in any sort of hell. Like this is a situation where the right person making the right calls and the right moves and bringing in the right coach, all the above. If all that can happen in the way it needs to happen, I mean, this isn't a terrible job. I mean, if you're a guy like Vrabel and this news coming out that like really the Jets are the only landing spot for a GM, like why wouldn't you want the opportunity like to come in here and be the head coach and turn this thing around with basically a GM of your choice? Because I'm pretty sure at this point the Jets would allow like Vrabel the opportunity to kind of be involved in that decision. I don't think that's a situation that's really kind of outside the norm here when you're dealing with a guy of Vrabel's caliber. But who knows? And last name that I've seen kind of popping up on the Twitter sphere and in the news, Mike Greenberg. And no, this is not the Mike Greenberg from ESPN. This is Mike Greenberg, who is another former Jet fan. Grew up in Long Island. Um, Mike Greenberg of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, assistant GM there. Been there for quite some time. Um, here's a candidate that's really kind of seen seen it all and seen it successful. You know, Tampa Bay is a team that we kind of all kind of looked at and said it's an option. It's an opportunity for the Jets to kind of look at and say, okay, you know, get a veteran quarterback, bring him in here, and everything will work out. And I think that was the hope for the Jets, but unfortunately, that thing didn't work out. But here's a guy who was able to manipulate the salary cap in a way where he can get as many talented players into the building while Tom Brady was there. He was able to, you know, in a year where after the Super Bowl, players were due for huge paydays, restructure contracts in a way that did not handicap the team moving forward. I mean, it's a situation where I mean he's seen it all, and he's seen how to successfully build a franchise when when after the last cycle with Lovie Smith. I mean, they transitioned over to Bruce Arians, brought in Todd Bowles, got the whole thing rolling the right way. That first year with Jameis Winston, you look at that team and you really kind of equate it to what the Jets were doing, just on the opposite side. That offense looked outstanding before Tom Brady got there, and then Tom Brady got there and took it over the top. The defense was horrible in those years. But when Tom Brady got there, it was about just kind of keep the thing going. Defense, you got to get better, and then we'll eventually figure it out, and then where to go. Eventually led them to a Super Bowl. But he's a business guy, and I think that has a lot. That would obviously have some benefit to Willie Johnson. He kind of leans more on the business side of things. Seems like, especially with a lot of his decision making. Obviously, his primary objective is to make money with the team. Winning hasn't obviously been the primary focus because Jets haven't done a lot of that. So a guy like Greenberg, who has built his roots through capology and through that side, makes a lot of sense for them to work their way. And I mean, with the way that he's handled the Tampa Bay Buccaneers salary cap is outstanding, and the Jets kind of need that here at this moment in time with 30 million in cap space and a lot of moves to be made, whether it be Devontae Adams, Aaron Rodgers, the list goes on and on. All the dead cap they have on the salary cap next year, with void contracts. This is all stuff that has to get cleaned up, and the beauty of it is that it can get cleaned up quickly. Um, but you need the right guy making those decisions, and obviously being able to create roughly 75 to 80 million cap space. Obviously, there will be an offseason conversation here in the next few weeks. On this podcast, but having the ability to create $80 million in cap space and using that cap space in the right way, who else would you trust better than a guy who knows the cap, like Mike Greenberg does? And I think that would be a home run hire. If you ask me today, like where do I lean just because of the fact that I think Vrabel heads to New England. I mean, Vrabel would be my number one, obviously. Let's not go there. But if you ask me today where I lean um, outside of that, it would be a situation where the Jets hire a guy like Mike Greenberg from Tampa Bay and pair him with somebody he's familiar with in Liam Cohen. And, whenever you bring in an offensive coordinator or a defense coordinator to be your head coach, the biggest question becomes who's going to be running things on the other side of the football. Does Rex Ryan have interest in being a defense coordinator? I don't think that's the case, but how outstanding would it be to kind of find yourself in a situation where that is the case, where you basically have two head coaches on either side of the football with a general manager who has familiarity with what the head coach needs out of the offense. Rex Ryan's going to get the most out of his defense, and a lot of things that we hate um, Robert Saleh for, like a lot of the things that got me going crazy, the keeping Sauce Gardner on one side of the field when he's obviously an outstanding cover corner, and you see the teams taking advantage of that, moving their skill players to opposite sides of the field. Um, it's one of those situations where Rex Ryan will come in here and he'll turn his defense to what we believe it should have been this year. He'll get things corrected, and he's going to have potentially a top 7 pick. When you look at the draft, that top 7 pick is likely going to be a defensive player. Just looks like it, unless Ted McMillan falls out of the top 5, which is possible. I mean, it's still very early in the process, but Rex Ryan's able to add to this defense another potential player, whether it be like a guy like Abdul Carter, who, let's be real, Rex Ryan never really had a true pass rusher while he was with the Jets. Calvin Pace was his best guy. They brought in Jason Taylor for a year, but he wasn't the same Jason Taylor, obviously, that late into his career. Yes. But um, again, I mean, I'm thinking ahead of myself here, way ahead. I don't know if that's just a fantasy world that I live in, but if Rex Ryan just really wants to be here and he has interest in being here as a defense coordinator, the Jets could go the route of going with an offensive minded guy. Bring in a guy who has had experience, successful experience as a Jets head coach who can help guide a up and coming offensive coordinator. I don't think it's the worst situation in the world. I think you can do a lot worse than that. But then obviously, you look at it and you can say you could do a lot better. But unfortunately, guys like Ben Johnson aren't coming here. He doesn't seem like he wants to interview unless the reports coming out are incorrect. But that's what you're hearing. Unless, you know, Vrabel comes back for a second interview and he's blown away from the Jets for whatever reason, enough to lure him away from a team he previously played for and had success there as a player. Um, yeah, a lot could potentially go into what this eventually comes out, but yeah, let me know in the comments, Jet fans. I mean, who do you want as your head coach? Who do you want as your GM? And is there a potential marriage of offensive coordinator, defense coordinator with a general manager that makes a lot of sense to you that maybe I'm missing? And also keep me honest too. I think I got all the names I've read so far today, um, but it just seems like that list is growing by the hour. So I definitely could have missed somebody in the hour here, or even before that. I know that I almost missed the Mike Greenberg news right before he had been listed there. So anyway, so yeah, that's all I got here. Jet fans, the nightmare's over. The season's finally gone. We know where we're picking in the draft. We know we have a lot of a busy next few weeks coming up here. From a Jets standpoint, just kind of understanding who's coming in and out of this building, who's being interviewed. Try and connect dots. Again, keep me informed of my comments, and you can find me on X as well. It's gonna be an interesting few weeks for sure. That's to say the least, and it always is. And when the hiring happens, we're all going to praise whoever the hire is. But let's just kind of understand here: this is not going to be an easy job for whoever comes in. But we just got to hope for the best, man. I mean, we never know who's going to be a good hire. And yeah, you look at Sean McVay when he was hired from the Rams. Rams got kind of, you know, ridiculed for that move. When they hired Sean McVay, it was a definite outlandish hire. I think he was a quarterback coach. He wasn't even an offensive coordinator. He was a quarterback coach for the Redskins at the time, now the Commanders, and you know that move has turned out to be outstanding. I think there's you know upward of 26 teams that would take Sean McVay to be their head coach today, and at the end of the day, you just never know what's going to make a good coach. If that were the case, I mean, the Jets have hired some solid coaches over the last few cycles. Todd Bowles was a hot name in his year. Robert Saleh was the hot name when he was hired. Um, Joe Douglas was the hot name. The Jets were in a similar situation that they're going to be in this offseason, where they were the only GM opening in that cycle because they did it after the draft and they interviewed basically whoever was left at that point in time. And Joe Douglas was that big name that everyone kind of pointed to, and he ended up getting the job. The Jets have done the right thing with bringing people in. It just, for whatever reason, when they get here, it just doesn't ever seem to work out in our favor. But let's hope something's different here. Let's hope this is the time where something changes. Keep your optimism up as much as possible. Um, at some point, we got to get it right, right? I mean, it just you know throw a dart as many times at the dartboard. Eventually, something's got to hit, and we find ourselves in an interesting offseason where we got to throw three darts and hit bullseye on all three: head coach, GM, and possibly even a quarterback. Um, so yeah, loads of fun. But Jeff fans, let's keep it going. Well, let's have a fun off season. Hopefully, a lot of content coming. And just like let's keep this thing positive, man. And let's go Jets.